What is natural selection?
Natural selection is the theory that was proposed by Charles Darwin in 1859. He suggested that all creatures from common ancestors. Changes or adaptations appear slowly and sequentially over time. Organisms survive and reproduce because they possess characteristics that help them live in their surrounding conditions.
I remember learning about how he studied different species over time.
Charles Darwin noticed that fossilized animals, as well as living animals from different places, looked similar to animals that lived in England. Do you know why this was important?
Charles Darwin was an Englishman who proposed the theory of natural selection after studying a series of birds. He described it as descent with modification.
He was studying on an island thousands away from England.
Exactly. He was really far away from England. He predicted that intermediate forms between the great groups of organisms would eventually be found. After scientists studied fossils, they came up with ways to describe how a population goes through the evolution process.
What did they do with what Darwin discovered?
After Darwin, scientists began to classify the types of evolution as happening in one of three ways: gradualism, punctuated equilibrium, or stasis.
So let's start at the beginning. Tell me about gradualism.
Well, gradualism is a model of evolution in which a gradual or slow change in a species occurs over a very long period of time.
So, okay, what is punctuated equilibrium?
Punctuated equilibrium results in a drastic change in species over a very short period of time. New species appear suddenly in the fossil record, and very little evidence is left behind to show the transition from the ancestral species to the new form.
This diagram shows a graph where punctuated equilibrium is illustrated. There is a sudden change in species followed by long periods of little or no change.
It is followed by long periods of little or no change.
So how is stasis different then?
Well, stasis describes a state in which no evolutionary changes occur for a long time. Crocodiles have not changed from their original form in 200 million years of existence.
That's pretty weird. So some animals look like they've been around for a long time also, like the turtle and the armadillo.
Yeah, so that was...
This slide shows a comparison of gradualism on the left, which is a slow, steady change in species, and punctuated equilibrium on the right, where there's a sudden, drastic change in the species.
Be the same thing. We will focus some more on what Charles Darwin discovered. For several years, he studied the finches on the Galapagos Islands. He noticed how they had different beaks depending on their diet. This process of adapting their beaks to match their food source led to the evolution of finches.
Darwin studied the feeding habits and beaks of finches on the Galapagos Islands. They're located off the coast of Ecuador, and Ecuador is in South America.
So their beaks change through adaptation.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, there are three types of natural selection: directional selection, disruptive selection, or stabilizing selection.
Okay, what's the difference?
Well, directional selection occurs when there is a single phenotype at one extreme of the phenotypic range is favored. This results in a change in population.
So one particular species becomes more successful.
Right. Disruptive selection favors an individual at both extremes. This leads to a new species, which is called speciation.
New species can form this way?
You've got it. Stabilizing selection leads to favored genotypic combinations that produce an intermediate phenotype. It maintains status quo.
So all three of these ways leads to changes in species or keeps the species the same?
Yeah, the amazing diversity of species on Earth is due to part in natural selection.
Would this biodiversity have anything to do with mutations?
Yes, mutations are the driving force behind changes in organisms that happens at the DNA level. Genes control traits, and those traits are passed on from one generation to the next.
So how would that affect natural selection?
When organisms are well suited for their environment, they will survive and pass on their genes to the next generation. This describes an organism's fitness.
What happens when more organisms are born than can survive because of limited resources such as food and water?
Well, species in any geographic location compete for food, space, shelter, mates, and other resources. If one particular species has traits that gives them an advantage over others, they will be better able to survive in that environment.
So fitness is the ability to survive and pass genes on to the next generation.
You got it.
Directional selection is a type of natural selection where there is a change in population. Disruptive selection is a type of natural selection that forms new species. This is called speciation. Stabilizing selection is a type of natural selection that reduces variation in species, maintains the status quo, or in this diagram, it stays in the middle. Have you ever wondered what can explain the diversity of life on Earth?